technical folks don't leave a crumb trail on how they got there.
I'm going to simplify even more. Actually. What are business objects? How can they get started? Actually, so they, that at this point, actually, that
One of the things that you'll realize in the business intelligence industry, and I'm using that as a broad term to just the data ingestion industry, is that it's a very buzzword-driven industry. Now, if you remember Elon Musk, one of the things he said is that that manufacturing is 100 times harder than prototyping. I'll give you a little bit about my background. I started back when the dot-com bubble burst and everything was falling apart, and I got in the world of Crystal Reports back then. Crystal Reports was it was a cool tool, and back then it was super innovative, super exciting. Now it's like an old dog that nobody cares about. But ultimately, we got sucked into the world of consulting, got acquired by a consulting company. So I've lived in the world of consulting for probably about like 18 years now. So lots of different teams that I've worked with in the consulting world. And it's all been around mostly data warehousing, data management, integration. And what I realized, this is something kind of, most technical folks, the more technology you sort of ingest and learn, one of the things that technical folks often will do is they won't leave a crumb trail. And here's what I mean by that. When you're getting your head into a technical space, it's very encompassing, and you're going to have a lot of complexity that you've had to figure out in your own mind to really reach a place that you can succeed at any kind of building. And what I've noticed is that uh, technical folks don't leave a crumb trail on how they got there. They just know it, but they can't explain it to other people, right? I guess my specialty has been through the years is attempting to leave a crumb trail in every direction that I've gone, so that I can rewind the playbook and be able to explain it to a business constituency. Is one of the challenges that businesses have, is that they are unable to communicate with the folks that are technical, because the technical folks can't rewind the crumb trail for the non-technical audience. And so, and I'll tell you a little story about how this all started. How my video series started on YouTube around data. I we were doing a proposal for a data warehouse with an organization. Everybody was really excited about executing on it. We had approvals across the board. The only person that hadn't approved was the CFO, and we couldn't figure out, well, why hasn't he approved? Because what was happening is it just seemed to be losing momentum, yet everybody was excited. And it's like, well, finally someone said, hey, look, I think our problem is the CFO is just not sold on this. He just doesn't believe it. And so we ended up visiting the client. This was back before COVID, where you could actually visit clients. But anyway, we were there, and we met in his office, and he said, he closed the door, and he said, all right, what is a data warehouse? And
okay,
so we had spent all this time, and he had been in those presentations, but the problem was the technology descriptions and all of this stuff, it was just way over his head. And so that was at that point in time, late in an evening, I was like, let's start a YouTube channel that just tries to explain the most basic things to business users. And it turns out that the technical users are the ones that appreciate it the most, because they need to be able to explain this stuff to business users. So it's not always the case that these videos end up, going into a business world, and the business users are the consumers. It's actually the technical parties that are watching the videos and they're saying, okay, this is a good way of explaining this where they're going to be able to understand it. So that's how the video series got started. We've been doing it for it's probably like 12 years now.
So, and thanks for the great introduction. The name intricity is
Yeah,
not a real word, but then it's in,
it
I
feels like
guess,
it.
like intricacy plus simplicity formed
You
intricity.
know how that name came about. We would love to say that it was some kind of advanced planning, but really what it was is the domain available? Yes. Okay, take it. That's the name. It's the new name.
I'm
I think that's
pretty
how many
sure.
companies come about these days.
I'm pretty sure. I see that you are like a hardcore technical person. You dove into like really core concepts of you know of data warehouse and crystal reports. I
Hmm.
remember working with some crystal report consultants, and they were highly paid. This was in 2008, and then at
Yeah.
some point, actually, companies realized like they're paying too much for this product and the consultants, and then they said, okay, we are migrating to SQL Server integration service or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. What happened is business objects back in the day,
Yeah.
they business objects dominated a lot of business intelligence many years ago.
I'm going to simplify even more actually. What are business objects?
Oh, business objects. Yeah. So business objects is a BI tool.
Uh-huh.
So BI tools, I mean, if we even want to get simpler, the BI tools are the stuff that read the data out of the database to produce formatted reporting on a really industrialized scale. And business
BI as in
objects,
business intelligence, and then
yes.
the
And
one
business
product I am
objects,
familiar with is OBIE, Oracle
yes,
Business Intelligence. I guess I
perfect.
don't know. Yeah, yeah.
So that's a great example of a metadata driven BI tool. The
Hmm.
same was true for business objects. Business objects is a metadata. They were the first really to come up with this concept of I want to give users the ability to generate content without requiring them to know a ton of SQL. And so they would create these virtual layers over the database uh, that would obscure the SQL, so you didn't have to live in SQL, but you could drag and drop names of data elements, and that those when you drag those data elements in, it would automatically generate the SQL necessary to query the data warehouse or database. Business objects was sort of the first to do that. And then there was a lot of copycats after that. Cognos was a big competitor, and then OBIE came out, same thing. um, and but then SAP acquired business objects, and I'll tell you, I mean, it's just like an instant change. As soon as that happened, it was like, okay, this company that was seemingly neutral and kind of supported everybody now basically just supports SAP. Now SAP would take exception to me saying that, but it's pretty evident that that happens to almost every business intelligence tool that gets acquired by a larger product offering. You can see this today with tools like Looker. Looker is a tool that had a very similar landscape, metadata driven ETL, or excuse me, metadata driven BI. um, cool stuff built for the cloud. It's a great tool. But once Google acquired them, it changed the trajectory of the tooling to be really very Google focused. And again, it's not fair to say this because they sell to everybody. But that's what happens when you have a gigantic company acquiring, another company. It's just it's what's going to happen. So it's like Tableau. I mean, Tableau is going to become a Salesforce tool. So
So you're running two companies, and then of course you come from a tech background, and you also have like sales, procurement, marketing background, like and then you have you lived a little bit in Brazil.
I did.
I
There it is. There's the flag right there.
I think like you're a perfect combination actually of sales and tech, and now
Yes.
you can be the bridge Uh, so your audience is mostly data people, and then my channel, I kind of cover like database topics and DevOps topics,
Hmm.
AWS. Let's say like some uh, college graduates or about to be graduates, or let's say for those people who are watching this interview,
Yeah.
uh, and then they are like, okay, so I kind of like working with data, and
Yep.
then I know that when I started, actually, I just joined a consulting firm, and then they happened to have some projects for DBAs, and that's how I became a DBA.
Yeah.
And so is what how can they get started actually? So they they at this point, actually, these universities are pretty. I think they're teaching like SQL and database management systems, subjects and things like that, and maybe even more like MongoDB, and I
Hmm.
see UC Berkeley there, they have good courses.
Yeah.
Um, so where do they go from there actually?
Yeah. So there's two aspects to data that often don't get talked about. And one is sort of the um or one gets talked about a lot and the other one does not get talked about. And the one that get talk about a lot is data science and those kinds of activities. Those are the buzzwords. Everybody's excited about those. You know, those are the realms of statistics and machine learning and all of that sort of stuff. And that is a topic that has a lot of heat, light, and focus on it. One of the things that you'll realize in the business intelligence industry, and I'm using that as a broad term to just the data ingestion industry, is that it's a very buzzword driven industry. It's like 100% buzzword driven. Just a few years ago, it was big data and Hadoop, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
all anybody cared about, right? And so data science is one of these buzzwords that really hits people, and executives feel pressure to do data science projects. There's another realm to data management that a lot of people don't talk about, um, and that is the manufacturing of data into information. Now, if you remember Elon Musk, one of the things he said is that that manufacturing is 100 times harder than prototyping. Um, and he knows something about manufacturing and prototyping, right? He's generated prototype cars and then goes out and building the factory. Do you remember when Elon Musk was kind of on the cusp of failure and he was sleeping at the factory, and he was turning into
Yeah.
a mental mess? You
Yeah.
know, that's because the manufacturing process, the replication of that success is so much more difficult than the prototyping of that success. Now, what is data science? It's prototyping. It is exactly prototyping. It is the event of you going and looking at data and saying, hey, maybe this will work. Let's try this. Let's experiment with this. It's iterating through models and statistics and those kinds of things, so that you can make a discovery that the organization might be able to use for future references, or you might have it. It's about discovery, right? But what about the manufacturing? I mean, what about turning data into information every single day so that business can consume actual information, not just gobs of, haystacks and haystacks of raw data? What about the needle? I mean, people need to get that needle from the haystack every single day. You can't just sit back and assume that you're just going to have an endless number of data science analysts uh, reinventing the wheel every single time they want to do some analysis, right? So there's two categories. Now, everybody's really excited about the data science category, but I'm telling you, corporations rely on manufacturing data into information, and that's the real meat of data, is getting that. And it's 100 times harder, easily, hands down. It's 100 times harder than doing it
Yeah.
just doing straight up data science. Data science is exciting. I'm not taking anything away from it. It's exciting and necessary. um there's an old concept, and I brought this up in my Amazon BI Tech Talk. There's a concept that was brought up by a gentleman named Jordan Peterson, and it's the concept of uh, and it's part of the big five personality traits: orderliness and openness, and that both, people have some measure of both orderliness and openness. Right? What does that mean? If I'm orderly, I have a clean room, everything's like very nice. If I'm open, I'm really open to new ideas. Um, and now, the bad side of being too orderly is that you're closed to new ideas. The bad side to being too open is that your room's a mess and everything's a mess around you because you're just trying and experimenting new things, right? Well, those two traits actually reveal themselves in data science and and manufacturing data. Okay, so in data science, the traits of openness and being able to onboard data very easily into like a data lake is super important. I need to be able to onboard data quickly if I'm going to be a data scientist. But I can't feed a pile of data to my business. If I do, they're just going to be lost and unable to really interpret what that is.
Yeah, I have
Okay, so
500 nodes of HBase, and I
yes,
have 50 petabytes of data. Now what?
yes. How exciting, like this gentleman named Nassim Taleb. You may have heard of him. He's the guy that wrote the book The Black Swan. He gave a really great lecture where he said big data is a total waste of time. And it was an interesting, and this, you have to know, this was him saying this back in 20, like 15, 14, like back when big data was such a craze. I mean, when you have Jim Cramer like ringing a bell for big data, it's like, okay, like we're at the total peak of
Yeah,
buzz talk.
yeah,
But what happened was, what Nassim Taleb said right around this time was big data is a complete waste of time. Imagine you need to cross the street, and and you're being fed information about the color of the cars and the size of the pebbles on the road and the color of the sky, and all of this superfluous information that's totally useless to you, when all you need to know one thing: is the crosswalk open and are there cars coming? That's it. That's all you need to know, right? So this concept of manufacturing data and having the data be relevant to you as a user. The relevancy is becoming super important right now because we're seeing a massive centralization of data that's happening right now. Hadoop did start the centralization scenario. So just to rewind the clock a little bit, most enterprise data environments had a locality problem in their data. Their data was just literally spread across all these different application systems. So if you needed to report, this is back in my Crystal reporting days, you had a Crystal report connection to SAP and a Crystal report connection to Siebel Systems back in the day, a Crystal report connection to PeopleSoft and Salesforce, and so you had these like individual connections, just a total mess. So locality had not been solved yet, and Hadoop offered at least the potential of being able to solve the locality problem. You could bring all the data and it could live in one place. Now, it was unstructured, which created a mess because if you tried to query it, it was going to take an hour. It just wasn't made for these kinds of queries. And so it had a lot of hope, but there was no beef. There was the old Burger King commercial, or no, Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef? There's no beef. Everybody was so excited
yeah.
about big data, and as soon as they try it, it was like so slow. I can't query this thing. What's happened, and this started with Snowflake, and others have gotten on board to the methodologies. Snowflake and Salesforce have become really tight friends. but Snowflake made it actually possible to take a data set that is of the petabyte scale and be able to query it, which was something that up to that point people were not able to pull off.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is massive centralization. And that massive centralization is now creating new problems, which is, where do I put my access control to my data? How do I get 100,000 people to connect to 30 petabytes of data? Um, and by the way, those 100,000 people are using 37 different BI tools. How do I get my access control to work in that situation? Because in the past, what we used to do is we would go to business objects or MicroStrategy or Cognos or Tableau or Power BI or any one of these BI systems. We would go to those systems and we would embed the access control to the content into that BI layer. And so they either could or could not see data based on how I programmed that BI layer. Well, if I've got all of my data now centralized and I've got 37 different BI tools, each with their own proprietary access control layer, I've got a many to many relationship I'm not going to be able to manage. So what we've realized is you've got to bring all of the access control to the data into the data warehouse or the data, cloud data platform. And that's the big thing that's happening right now. That's what we see happening right now. It's almost like a giant data governance event.
So to summarize, actually, so a lot of people are sort of like they want data science jobs. Machine learning is another thing
Mm-hmm.
that students go after, and even like people who are already working and they kind of like pivot to that kind of jobs, actually.
Yeah.
And then so 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 these things are nice, actually. Data science is basically, you get all this data from all these different places, and
Mm-hmm.
then you help centralize the data.
Yeah.
So that's data science. And machine learning is, of course, like coming up with models, and then giving that predictability to the company, to the enterprise.
Yeah.
For example, fraud is,
Yeah.
it's used widely in all the companies, actually. So like, let's say an e-commerce order, like in an Amazon order, that might have a fraud score
Yeah.
associated with something.
Yeah.
What you're saying is actually, so BI is actually really, really important to companies more than they realize.
Yeah.
And
I
basically
like
you're
to call it the
encouraging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like to call it less about BI because people get caught up in the, you know, analytics versus BI. I like to speak to it in terms of the data to information process.
Yeah.
There's data over here, there's information over here.
Yeah.
These are not the same thing.
Mhm.
Okay. Data is not information. Data is, well, it's data. Information is actionable. I can do something with this.
Yeah.
Now, data science allows me to prototype my way into that answer. But data science, if you're, let me just put it this way, data science is the allows me to experiment to get to that answer. And that's an important thing to do
Yes.
because it allows you to have the openness. Okay, when we architect these landscapes to turn data into information, yes, we do define um, that manufacturing process, but in that plan we also define a loose data set, which would be in a data lake. And this data set is designed with lab environments to enable the data science teams to take their discoveries and productionize those discoveries into the data to information process.
Yeah. Can you give
Okay.
an example? This is definitely, I think, can we go one level
Yeah,
deeper?
of course.
Yeah.
So when we're loading, okay, so what you're going to set up is a framework. Okay.
Mhm.
You've got your source systems, your application systems. Okay. And we're going to feed that data with a data replication tool into a cloud data environment like
Okay.
Snowflake.
Okay.
Okay. Snowflake allows us an unlimited amount of compute and storage, and that's why we want it there quickly. Okay. Once we've brought that data into the data lake, we are going to define some very base, um, um, some very base logic to ensure that the data is in the form that the applications intended it to be. Okay. It's going to look like it came out of the application, but it's all living in one place. Okay. We're not trying to give data science people extra work in order to find their discoveries. We want to make the data lake as pristine as possible so that when the data science team goes and looks at it, they're not having to write a ton of logic to piece together what that application is doing. Okay,
How
so
does
we
that
may.
apply? I'm sorry. How does that? I'm trying to make it more concrete. So let's say you have e-commerce orders, and those are the application systems you're talking about.
Mhm.
Then coming into all this data is coming into, like, there is pricing, there is fraud, all these things
Yep.
that we are, the data science folks are trying to sort of like predict and then provide that information to the business basically.
Yep.
So is that
So
is
so the
that what
data
it is?
science teams, yeah, so the data science teams are going to have access to this data lake. Okay, they'll be able to run their analyses against that data set. When they find a measure or a methodology that predictably identifies the fraud, instead of using those existing data science frameworks to do all of that work over and over again, because that's an expensive method of processing. If you're doing all of your work within a data science framework, it's an expensive method of processing. What you want to be able to do is identify the method and the methodology at which you came to that number. We're going to take that methodology and then we're going to put it into the factory so that every time you produce information, that discovery, just like think of Elon Musk's cars, right? There's a discovery that the team makes. They come up with a prototype, but we need to manufacture that prototype. It needs to become part of our manufacturing process from going forward. So this is how you encompass both the openness as well as the orderliness in your data architecture. So you have your data science team, but you also have your manufacturing team that is manufacturing this data. And what you're trying to do is get the least possible cost of producing data into information. Um, so when I categorize data science and the factory, I like to think of the factory as, and this isn't a perfect description, so bear with me. I like to think of the factory as deterministic analytics. These are measures that I can take. I can produce these on a regular basis um, without reinventing the wheel every single time. I like to think of data science more as probabilistic analytics. I'm generating probabilities. I'm generating, even think of machine learning. I mean, machine learning is a series of tiny probabilities going through many nodes. You know, um, but that's an expensive proposition. You don't want to have to run everything through machine learning unless you're measuring one single event at a time. So if you're trying to predict the outcome of a single event, then that makes sense. But if you're doing bulk events, you're trying to do, a million things at the same time. You want to try to lower the cost of your compute for that event. So you want to narrow what is the exact piece of logic that I need to process in order to generate this data set. And that's what the world of turning data into information is all about. You don't want the cost of your manufacturing process to be so expensive that and this happens. And see, most organizations don't realize that these two lanes exist. What they'll say is, well, we're going to set up a massive data science environment, and that is going to be our data intelligence or data to information process. And so they spend a ton of money on this stuff. And all the while, they have tools that already do this data to information process sitting on the shelf. So they'll end up rebuilding the factory over and over again. They did this back in the days of big data. And so back then, Oracle was sort of the de facto data warehouse at the time, and they said, well, we're just going to move this all to Hadoop. Well, they were just rebuilding, basically reinventing the wheel, hoping for better results, but it doesn't change the results. What they need to realize is that there are two lanes, and that one lane is important and the other lane is important. They need to enable each other, and you need to set up an organization that can enable those two to coexist. The data lake is the curation layer for all of that. Beyond the data lake is where you get into the data warehouse. And this is where we're going to be pulling data. And this is where the folks that are data science folks need to communicate, their discoveries so that they can encapsulate those discoveries into data transformation processes that are low cost.
Yeah. So when you go actually meet your customers, your clients, you're basically asking like, okay, what's your goal? Of course, you want more customers, you want more money, you want more revenue. And then what are the predictors or the factors that move the needle for you, right? Which is, it could be the pricing of your products. It could be, of course, fraud. Actually, if you're losing
Yep.
millions of dollars in fraud every year, we can actually
Mhm.
maybe reduce that. Okay, so now where is your data sitting? Is it in RDBMS like Oracle or whatever?
Yep.
Is it in is it in this Hadoop cluster right there? So now what tools you have to actually kind of like predict that actually, like for
That's
example,
right.
fraud. Actually, what tools do you have?
Yep.
So it's sort of going back to my previous experience. I was working for StubHub, which is right now unfortunately sort of like going through struggle
Yeah.
because of
The COVID.
COVID. But they had good systems actually. So they had like
Yeah.
a data warehouse team, and all their main sort of like flagship service was producing fast fact reports actually, which is
Mhm. Mhm.
basically saying, just telling the management what was the revenue, what was the what was the sales, expenses, etc., etc. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just fast facts reports going out to the management. So that's the
Yep.
data warehouse team. And then I work with the fraud team, and they they kind of like predict, they came up with this fraud score real time. And of course you
Cool.
have like external third party services like I guess Akamai, and they also actually
Mhm.
provided a similar
Fraud.
service, and based
Yep.
on that they will flag an order as fraud or not actually.
Right. Right.
So these are some real time scenarios that that students, audience, and anybody who's watching, they might be working on. And then
Mhm.
now you're talking about Snowflake, which is like giving access to so much data. Then
Yes.
you can use any BI tool,
Yep.
and then you can query it easily now.
Mhm.
But then you're talking about an important problem which lies there, which is how do you actually like make sure like this person only sees this data, but
Yes.
right.
And it's a huge issue right now in the market because and it's addressable, but it needs automation. So we've been working on the Intricity side at building an automated mechanism so that the content can be governed, because the content, if you're going to make this happen, you've got to be able to address the fact that there are an unlimited number of objects that can be produced in Snowflake. Now that's, we don't think about that, but there really are an unlimited number of objects that can be produced, especially if you have 100,000 people. In other words, you could generate roles, tables, uh, uh, you know, warehouses. Um, I mean, there's a whole bunch of categories, but you could generate an unlimited number of those things, and they do. And what ends up happening is people that administer those systems don't know how, for example, to turn off a certain role, because it'll impact stuff downstream. And so you have to first govern that content, have a naming convention for that content that can be mastered. And then on the other side, you need to tie existing identity management systems that the organizations typically will have. So organizations have these things called identity management systems, which are they address the chaos of hiring and firing and promoting and demoting people. And so those identity management systems already exist. That's the system of record that we should be pointing to determine whether a certain person has access to data or does not. And so this is, kind of an active topic right now in large Snowflake deployments, because that's a very necessary thing. You need to have this automation to actually provision who has access to certain information or not, and that includes who can see data that's masked or not. So social security numbers or credit card numbers or things of that nature. So if I was looking at somebody that was looking to looking at their career, the high earners in this world that do really quite well for themselves, but it's a stressful position to be in because you have to be in front of other people and you've got to be able to ingest an entire business in a single go, and that's the role of a data architect. So when I think of the title data architect, I'm thinking about a person that can model a data warehouse or model an information system. Doesn't always have to be a data warehouse. It could be a data lake that's also connected to potentially a data science lab. Okay, but that can produce a data model that can answer the questions that are required of it. And so what that means is that you need to know what the questions are. What that means is that you got to go interview the business. So if you have the capacity to interview the business, you're good at that, and you're good with data, and you can do this kind of modeling. There's a lot of learning that you can take from these different kinds of modeling methods, and that is a career path that does do well. It requires really good communication skills, very technical, and broad-minded. You got to be able to look at a lot of different business scenarios and be able to actually model it into a database schema. Um, at the end of the day,
Are you aware of like any, like, I mean, I want to just end this interview with some learning resources that people can use. Like, what are, like, let's say someone who's a fresh graduate comes to you and like, okay, what should I do next? Like, what would you tell them actually?
get some fundamentals for data modeling under your belt and learn why it's good, and why it's necessary. Believe it or not, sometimes the most amazing startups, they don't know the basics of data modeling. Okay. Um, they'll get super excited about semi-structured data, but they don't know the basic concept of actually productionizing data into an information system. So learn the essentials of data modeling. There's several. These can kind of get religious at times, okay, but you have data vaults, and there's two versions of data vault. There's Kimball based modeling, and then there's the old religion of Inman modeling, and then you have application modeling, and so learn the different modeling methods, the types of schemas, and why they're good for what they do, and really understand that in your bones, so that when you're constructing this stuff for business, that you can be useful in that process.
Great. So data modeling is something people can start with. What else actually? What are like the cutting edge tools right now, like which people can learn?
It's a good question. I would say, believe it or not, because I do a lot of work in Snowflake, SQL is still the one. It's
Mm.
still SQL, guys. I mean, there's a lot of cool other tools, and we do a lot of work in PySpark, uh, um, JSON, um, I would say Python is another really important one. There's a lot of orchestration scripting around Python that happens in data that you really need to get your world around. Um, so this is the world of
What about
manufacturing
NoSQL?
data.
Is that, does it, is it,
NoSQL has, so in the realm of I need to read a record, write a record. I need to produce an application that might have a change down the road, and I need the flexibility to deal with those changes. That's where NoSQL is just amazing, the best. Replication, Couchbase is amazing. We love Couchbase for no as a NoSQL database.
mm.
They've got a lot of capability there, especially for mobile. They're just awesome. Um,
What about these AWS data uh, data oriented offerings like Kinesis and Kinesis Streams, and they have something like Firehouse or something like that. Yeah.
yeah. So those are all good tech. Anything in any of the clouds, those are all good technologies, and I would say AWS is the largest. So you're going to get the most out of the bang for your buck for AWS is going to be higher, at least for now. I would say if you were to prioritize which cloud platforms you're going to look at, it would start with AWS, then it would go Azure, and then it would go GCP,
Are you, are
Google
are you
Cloud.
working with Redshift? Is that something that
We have done work with Redshift, but the rank between Redshift to say Snowflake is been a big change there, and Redshift should have acquired Snowflake about 10 years, or not 10 years ago, 4 years ago. They should have acquired them. And I'm not trying to knock Redshift. They're a good tool, but there's a big technical gap between Redshift and Snowflake right now.
All right,
So
great. Actually, I want to respect your time. And then, so you have a website which is www.intricacy.com, and then
Intricity.
Intricity, sorry.
There you
And then,
go.
of course, intricacy plus simplicity. But anyway,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
all right. So intricity.com, and then you have like hundreds of consultants working for you,
We
uh,
do.
and then a lot of working with a lot of clients.
And we never got to talk about Blade Bridge. We should talk about Blade Bridge someday. So
Yeah, another time actually. And it
yes.
was a great conversation. All right, I will let you go,
All
and
right.
thank you
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
time. Actually, appreciate it.
You bet.
Uh, had a great time. Thank you.
Excellent. Have a good one. Take care.